Welcome to the introduction of our Bible study, Trustworthy. The goal of this study is to get to know who God is so that we see how trustworthy He is, and to recognize the areas in our own life and the times in our life where we tend to distrust God. The author talks about circumstances where we tend to trust God, which I found to be very interesting and so true in my life. When we trust God would be a circumstance where we feel safe and secure. And I think we can all identify with that. Things are going good. Things are going just like they are supposed to go. Nothing's deviating from the plan. So in those areas, it's easy to trust God in those circumstances. But then we start distrusting God. God starts deviating from the plans that we assumed that our life would take. And when the vision for our life that was safe and secure starts falling apart, that's when we start distrusting God. And what does that look like when we're distrusting God, so that we can recognize that we're doing that in the midst of these circumstances? And one way that we can recognize that we are distrusting God is that we start making suggestions to God and trying to look for our own solutions for things and trying to figure things out instead of just looking to God. Lysa calls that building altars of our own solutions. And I love that because you don't really think about that as building altars of your own solutions, but certainly they are, because you are looking at lots of different things to help you instead of depending on God. So I thought that was a beautiful way to say that. If that is what it looks like when we're distrusting God, then what would it look like to walk out a life of faith? And these are some of the questions that Lysa asked in your group guide on page 11, and which I love her questions because they tend to get you to look at your own life and really think about what you've learned and how to apply that. So one of her questions is, what does it look like to walk out a life in faith? And if we just look at what it looks like to be walking out a life that is not trusting God, then we can conclude from that what the opposite would look like. So if we are walking in faith, then that looks like resting in God's peace. It looks like chaotic circumstances around us, but that we are depending on God and that we are resting in His presence, that we are not frantically going about trying to find our own solutions, which I feel like we all have, because the school situation is absolutely, completely stressful. We've all tried to find our own solutions to that, and none of us seem to be able to come up with any of them that would give us any type of security or relief from that stress. So those are the situations. If we are resting in His presence and not frantically trying to find solutions of our own, then that is what it looks like to walk in faith. When we pray about these worries, we release all of that anxiety to Him and know He is going to take care of it. In 1st and 2nd Kings, we are going to see the patterns of the Israelites and the kings, and the cycles of distrust that they had in God, and how fear and insecurity caused them to look for solutions and make plans of their own instead of relying on God. So basically, the Israelites and their kings have these cycles that God is taking care of them and they feel secure, and then all of a sudden they start to have fear and insecurity and anxiety, and they start looking for their own solutions and not relying on God, and then they start worshiping idols, and it's this whole cycle. And that begs the question of, why do they do this? Because God has historically been so faithful to them, and they continue to distrust God even though He has never failed them or betrayed them. And Lysa Terkeurst asked this in one of the questions, like, why would they continue to do that? And I think clearly we can ask ourselves those questions, like, why do we continue to worry about things that we can't do anything about? And I think the answer is the Israelites and their kings, just like us, have fear about things. And in their time, they may have feared their enemies were going to capture them and kill them, and their men are running off and they have no men to fight for them. And so although that's what it looked like back then, like we have the same insecurities, like, things are crazy, like people are losing jobs, like I don't have the security of a job, I don't have the security of our kids going to school, like I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone next month, I can't really plan, like this is not what was supposed to happen. So we have those same situations where we have fear and anxiety and we let it overwhelm us. And that's what the kings and the Israelites did. Instead of looking to God and praying about it and just resting in his presence, they tried to find solutions of their own. And we see how detrimental that is to them. By looking at the life lessons of the kings and the Israelites, we can also hopefully learn how to identify our own trust issues, just like I talked about before. Recognize the situations where we tend to distrust God, and then come up with a plan to rest in his presence and to stop trying to make solutions of our own. So as you read this study, what you must remember is when you are reading about the kings, I want you to really think about how they reacted to situations and how you would react if you were that king, and then how these lessons that the king is learning can apply in your own life, because that will be the real value of this study. We will learn biblical information about king's place in history and what happened, but the real value of this study is to get to know God, to see through the kings examples of how faithful God is and how certain kings handled it like they should and other kings distrusted God, and how that all played out. So my hope for you in this study is that you will, 1, get to know who God is, that 2, you will learn how faithful and trustworthy he is, and 3, that you will get some tools to help you in these current circumstances to trust in God and rest in his presence.